Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins.
In the elder days of Middle-earth, when the fires of Mount Doom burned without rest and the shadow of Barad-dûr grew long across the land, a dreadful decree was spoken from the mouth of Sauron, the Dark Lord. The 9 kings of men who had once ruled proud and free had fallen under his dominion, their wills shackled by the rings of power. Now they were little more than shades, bound to his service beyond the reach of death or mercy. But Sauron, master of guile and terror, desired more than mere dominion over their souls. He desired to arm them with weapons that would carry his malice into every corner of the world. Weapons not of mere steel and iron, but of shadow and curse, of sorrow and unending despair. Thus was born the command to forge the blades of black fate, a terrible craft that would wound not only the body but the very spirit of those who dared oppose him. Deep within the bowels of Mordor, where even light quailed to tread, a forge was raised beneath the watchful towers. Flames green and unnatural leapt from the pits, and anvils of black stone lay ready, cold and thirsty for the hammer's song. Yet even the orc-smiths of Gorgoroth, cruel and cunning in their own right, dared not attempt so vile a forging. This task required hands both skilled and cursed, a heart once noble now turned to ash. And so Sauron sent his wraiths to seek Urthrak the Forsaken, a name long forgotten by the free peoples of Middle-earth. In the elder days, Urthrak had been a master smith of the elves, his blades carried by kings and heroes whose deeds had shaped the very course of history. But in the wars of ages past he had been captured and broken in the dungeons of the enemy. His body endured, but his spirit was twisted, bent, until only fragments of his former self remain. Bound in chains of cold iron and shrouded in despair, Urthrak was dragged before the Dark Lord. There he knelt, not out of reverence, but because his strength could no longer bear the weight of his sorrow. A voice like grinding stone spoke from the shadows. "You shall forge, O fallen one," said Sauron, "for none among your kind can rival the art that lingers in your blood. You shall forge blades for my 9, weapons to slay hope itself. Fail me, and your torment shall be everlasting." Urthrak raised his head, and for a fleeting moment, a glimmer of defiance sparked in his hollowed eyes. But he knew the truth. The world he had loved was gone beyond his reach. His kin would neither hear his cries nor come to his aid. In the end, there was no choice. With a slow, shuddering breath, he was led to the Black Forge. The tools of his former glory were given mockery in this place. Hammers that wept dark oil, tongs that scorched his flesh, bellows that fed the flames with the breath of the damned. The very air clawed at his throat, thick with the stench of decay and dread. Before him were lain 9 shards of cold, meteoric iron, fallen from the farthest dark of the heavens, gathered in secret by the servants of Sauron. The metal throbbed with a malign life of its own, whispering in tongues unknown even to the wise. Urthrak touched the first shard, and visions flooded his mind. Cities burning, forests withering, rivers running black with sorrow. Each piece of iron bore the curse of ruin, eager to be shaped into instruments of final death. As the Nazgûl watched from the shadows, cloaked and silent, Urthrak set to work. The hammer fell, and with each blow the forge screamed. Yet even as he labored, somewhere deep within the ruin of his heart, a battle was waged. A voice, soft and worn with memory, spoke from the darkness of his soul. It was the echo of who he had once been, a smith of light, a weaver of hope. "Do not yield," it whispered. Even in the grasp of despair, a spark may endure, but what could he do? Bound by chains both seen and unseen, Urthrak hammered and shaped the cursed metal, knowing that with every strike he fell further from the light, deeper into the abyss. Outside the forge, the skies of Mordor churned with storm and smoke, and across the lands of Middle-earth a shadow lengthened, unseen by many, but felt in the heart of all things that lived. A new terror was coming, borne upon blades that no armor could turn and no magic could heal. And at the heart of it all, Urthrak toiled on, a soul lost in twilight, crafting death for the nine who would be deathless. But the forging was only beginning. Darker rites awaited him, and the true horror of the blades had yet to be revealed. Days passed unmarked by sun or moon in the depths beneath Barad-dûr, for time itself seemed stilled in that place, frozen in a heavy mantle of despair. Urthrak, bowed but unbroken in body, labored unceasingly, his every motion dictated by the will of the Dark Lord. The forge roared and shrieked as the hammers fell, and the cursed metal yielded to his skillful touch, though it fought him with a malice unlike anything he had ever known. His hands, once so swift and sure in crafting wonders for the glory of the Eldar, were now torn and blackened, their flesh seared by the venom of the iron. Yet Urthrak did not falter, for he knew that failure meant a fate worse than the torment that already gnawed at his spirit. The nine, wraiths yet still half bound to mortal shape, stood ever near, their unseen eyes drinking in the spectacle of his labor. They were silent but for the faint rustling of their cloaks, a sound like dry leaves whispering across forgotten tombstones. They had once been kings, lords of mighty realms, bearers of wisdom and strength, yet now they were nothing but hollow vessels, eager for the weapons that would seal their doom and exalt their master's dominion over the living and the dead. As Urthrak shaped the first of the blades, folding the dark metal upon itself again and again, he began to weave into the iron spells of binding and sorrow, ancient incantations twisted by the black speech of Mordor. These were not words learned in the days of his youth under the trees of Lindon, but dark secrets wrested from him by pain and dread, perverted into chains that would ensnare the very souls of those the blades would strike. Each rune he etched into the steel bled a faint, baleful light, as though the iron itself wept for the horror it was becoming. The forge consumed much in those days. Not only the wood of gnarled trees felled from the ashen plains, but also the bones of fallen enemies, the dust of forgotten tombs, and the ichor of foul beasts bred in the pits of Gorgoroth. The flames, fed on such grim offerings, burned with a color not of this world, a deep, sickly green that seemed to devour rather than illuminate, casting shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. And all the while, the air grew thick with a gloom that pressed upon the heart, filling even the stoutest with a nameless dread. As the second and third blades took form beneath his battered hands, Orthroc's mind drifted and dreams came unbidden to him. He saw again the fair halls of his youth, the towers of white stone gleaming beneath a golden sun, the laughter of kindred voices carried on sweet winds. He remembered the light of the 2 trees as it lingered yet in the world, though dimmed, and the noble faces of those who had once called him brother. These memories pierced him like knives, for he knew they were but phantoms now, remnants of a world he could never again touch, and with each passing hour the strength they gave him waned. Still he worked, for in the depths of his heart a flicker of defiance remained, a stubborn ember that refused to be wholly extinguished. Though his body was enslaved, he whispered silent prayers with every blow of the hammer, hidden from the watching eyes of the Nazgûl. Prayers that some fragment of hope might be woven into the blades, some secret weakness that might one day undo the evil he was forced to create. It was a desperate, perhaps futile effort, but it was all that remained to him, and so he clung to it with the last shreds of his will. As the 7th blade was drawn from the coals, the ritual that would bind them to their true purpose approached. Urthrak was summoned before a dais of black obsidian, where Sauron himself awaited, wreathed in shadow so deep that his form could scarcely be discerned, save for a single burning eye that pierced through the gloom with a hatred so vast and ancient it seemed to consume all light, all hope. There, upon that dread altar, the final enchantments would be wrought. Enchantments to sunder spirit from flesh, to sow despair in the hearts of the mighty, to erase memory and light from the souls of all who were struck. Yet these dark rites could not be completed by spellcraft alone. A greater sacrifice was demanded, a price in blood and life that must be paid by the forger himself. Urthrak, standing hollow-eyed before the will of Sauron, knew then that he had been marked for that doom from the beginning. The blades would be his final work, and his essence, twisted and consumed, would live on within them, a part of their curse, a slave to the will of the Nine, and their master for all the long dark years to come. Still, the moment had not yet arrived. There was more forging to be done, more toil and sorrow to endure before the final doom could be sealed. The 8th blade lay yet unshaped upon the anvil, its cold dark length awaiting the hammer's fall. And Orthrak, gathering what little strength remained to him, returned to his task, even as the darkness of Mordor deepened about him, and the cries of the enslaved echoed in the night. And so the Black Forge roared on, and the blades of black faith drew nearer to completion, each stroke of hammer, and each whispered curse weaving a tapestry of death and oblivion that would stain the history of Middle-earth for all the ages to come. The 8th blade took form beneath Urthrak's weary hands, a thing of lean cruelty, its edge curved like the talon of a great fell beast, thirsting already for the blood it would one day spill. The cursed iron resisted the shaping, writhing against his blows as though it had a will of its own, but Urthrak, grim and unrelenting, bent it to his purpose, drawing upon the last reserves of strength and skill that lingered in his broken frame. Sweat mingled with blood upon his brow, and his breath came in ragged gasps, for the forge fire consumed not merely wood and flesh, but the very life of the one who wrought at its anvil. The Nazgûl watched still, their hollow faces hidden behind veils of darkness, their presence heavy and suffocating as the mists that choked the dead marshes. They had grown more solid with the passing of days, their forms more fixed, as though the forging of their blades lent substance to their ghostly bodies. A dread eagerness emanated from them, a silent hunger for the weapons that would forever bind them to the will of their master, and make them instruments of terror across the lands of men and elves alike. Earthrock did not speak, for in that place words held no power save the dark invocations of Mordor, and he dared not voice aloud the laments that gnawed at his soul. Instead, he worked on, his mind drifting like a ship upon a black and endless sea, remembering fragments of songs and tales once sung beneath the stars before the world was marred. He saw again the shining eyes of his beloved long lost to him, and the green and silver banners that had once flown from the white walls of his people's halls, banners that now lay torn and forgotten in lands drowned by shadow. At last the 8th blade was quenched in a bath of brackish water, its hissing cry like the wail of some tortured spirit. And Earthrock, with trembling hands, laid it alongside its brethren upon a great stone slab, where they glistened darkly in the flickering light, 9 instruments of doom, awaiting the final breath of enchantment. But as he turned back to the forge, knowing that one blade yet remained to be fashioned, a voice, cold and mocking, spoke from the gloom, and Earthrock stiffened as the shadow of the Dark Lord fell once more upon him. "O remains," said Sauron, his voice a blade that cut through the soul as surely as any steel, "and with it shall your task be ended, and your doom fulfilled. Let not your hand falter, smith of lost days, for much depends upon this final labor. A gift it shall be to my most faithful, a terror to the world of light, and your legacy in this age of ending." Earthrock bowed low, though it galled his pride, for he knew the futility of defiance, and returned to the anvil where the last shard of meteoric iron awaited. This piece was different from the others, darker and heavier, veined with threads of crimson that pulsed faintly, as though with a life of their own. He touched it, and a vision assailed him more terrible than any before. He saw the great cities of men reduced to ashes, the forests of the elves consumed by flame, and the seas themselves recoiling from shores blackened with death. And at the heart of it all stood the 9, crowned in shadow, their blades dripping with the sorrow of a world undone. A great weariness settled upon Earthrock then, a sorrow deeper than any he had yet known, and he nearly cast down his tools and surrendered to the darkness. But that small ember of defiance, buried deep within the ruins of his heart, flared once more, and he resolved that, even if he could not undo the evil to which he was bound, he would forge into the final blade a hidden flaw, a secret weakness that might, some day, be the unmaking of the terror he was forced to create. Thus he labored once more, each strike of the hammer a defiance against the shadow, each stroke of the chisel a prayer cast into the void. He wrought the final blade with greater care than any before, inscribing upon it runes so subtle that even the keenest eye might overlook them, runes that, if spoken in the tongue of the Eldar, might waken the iron from its cursed sleep and turn its power against its masters. It was a faint hope, a desperate gambit, but it was all he could do. As the blade neared completion, a hush fell over the forge, as though the very stones and flames held their breath, sensing the nearing of some dreadful threshold. The Nazgûl drew closer, and even Sauron himself seemed to lean forward from his throne of shadow, his burning gaze fixed upon the blade that would be his instrument of dominion. At last, with a final shuddering blow, Earthrack severed the blade from the forge, and it lay upon the anvil, gleaming darkly like a shard of night itself. The blades of black fate were complete, and with them the doom of many lands was sealed. Yet still one final ritual remained, one last horror to bind the weapons to the will of the Dark Lord and awaken their full malice. And for this, the blood and soul of the forger would be demanded, a sacrifice from which there could be no return. Earthrack, swaying upon his feet, gazed upon his work, and a great sadness filled him, greater than the bitterness of chains or the sting of the lash. He had fashioned many blades in his long life, weapons of beauty and wonder, forged for the defense of all that was good and fair, but now his legacy would be one of ruin and sorrow, and his name would be forgotten, save in whispers of dread. As the black-robed servants of Sauron approached to lead him to the altar of binding, Earthrock closed his eyes, and for a moment in the darkness behind his lids, he saw again the stars of old, bright and untarnished, shining above the undying lands across the western seas. A single tear traced the ruin of his face, and then he straightened his shoulders and walked unflinching to meet his fate, as the forge of Mordor blazed and the blades of black fate sang their silent, deathly song. In the deep places beneath Barad-dûr, where the very walls seemed steeped in malice, and the air itself clung like a shroud to all living things, a chamber had been prepared for the final rite, a hall vast and solemn, hewn from the bedrock of the mountain of fire, its ceiling lost in darkness and its floor set with slabs of obsidian etched in the ancient crooked letters of the Black Speech. The 9 were gathered there, arranged in a circle about a single black altar, and their hollow faces, though hidden by hood and cowl, seemed to drink in the gloom with a dreadful hunger. They stood motionless, save for the slow rise and fall of their shadowy forms, as though breathing the very despair that wreathed the place. In the center of that circle lay the blades of black faith, arranged like the spokes of a wheel whose hub was the altar itself. And above them, suspended in the air by chains of smoke and sorcery, hung a great stone basin filled with a dark, viscous liquid that shimmered with the hues of blood and night. It was the draught of binding, brewed from the tears of the damned, the venom of nameless beasts, and the sorrow of countless broken souls, a potion whose vapors alone could unmake the spirit of a lesser being. Earthrack was brought forth, his chains clinking dully against the stones, and though his body was bowed and his garments little more than rags, he walked with a dignity born of long sorrow and the memory of lost honor. He saw the altar and the blades, and he knew that the moment of his final undoing had come. Yet he did not falter, for he had chosen in the last strength of his heart to endure whatever doom awaited him rather than yield wholly to despair. Even in that blackest hour he sought to cling to the fragment of hope he had woven into the final blade, trusting that somewhere, someday, it might bear fruit against the darkness. Sauron himself was present, though his form was wreathed in such a mantle of shadow that it was as if night itself had taken shape and stood watching. His voice, when it came, rolled through the chamber like the tolling of a great iron bell, deep and merciless. "The time is come, O smith of forgotten glories," Nye said, "when you shall bestow the last measure of your craft upon these weapons, and in so doing, render yourself forever mine. No soul may forge instruments of such power and live. Thus by your own hand shall your doom be sealed. At a command from that terrible presence, the chains that bound Urthrak fell away, clattering to the stones, and 2 of the Nazgûl stepped forward, bearing him to the altar. There he was laid upon the black stone, his arms outstretched so that each hand touched the haft of a blade, while the basin above began to lower itself, its dark vapors swirling thick about his head. Throak did not struggle, for he knew that to resist was folly, and that the time for struggle had long since passed. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered within his heart the ancient names of the stars and the songs of the blessed realm, those first songs of the world before its marring, that he might carry their memory into the darkness where he must now go. The ritual began. In a voice that was neither wholly Sauron's nor wholly mortal, a chant was intoned, low and terrible in the tongue of old Morgoth, the master of all that was evil in the beginning. The words wound about Urthrak like chains, binding his spirit to the 9 blades, sinking hooks of shadow into the remnants of his soul. He felt himself being drawn forth, not swiftly, but with slow and merciless force, his life and memory unraveling like a skein of thread pulled apart by cruel hands. The draught of binding spilled forth from the basin, not poured by hand, but moving of its own will, flowing in thin black streams over Urthrak's brow, down his arms, and onto the blades he had forged. Where the liquid touched them, the iron flared briefly with a light that was not light, a sickly gleam that set the markings of the runes afire and filled the hall with the reek of burning sorrow. Pain beyond thought assailed him then, not the pain of flesh but of spirit, as though every joy he had ever known, every song he had ever sung was being stripped from him and cast into a void without end. Yet he held to the memory of the hidden runes he had wrought, the secret hope buried within the 9th blade, and he clung to it as a drowning man clings to a scrap of wood amid a raging sea. At length the chanting ceased, and the basin was drawn back into the darkness above, its contents spent. Urthrak lay still upon the altar, his body a husk, his eyes open but seeing naught of the world around him. His spirit, or what remained of it, was bound now within the blades, a captive wraith tethered to the will of the 9 and threw them to their master, a silent witness to the ruin that would follow. The 9 stepped forward and each took up a blade, feeling the surge of dark power that now answered to their call. Their forms grew more solid, their strength renewed, and their hunger sharpened to an unbearable pitch. They bowed before Sauron, pledging anew their undying loyalty, and he in turn gave them their first command: to go forth and sow terror in the lands beyond Mordor, to bring under his shadow the free peoples of Middle-earth. As they departed, their black cloaks streaming behind them like banners of night, Urthrak's body was left upon the altar, forgotten by all save the stones and the whispering darkness. Yet deep within the blades, the remnant of his will stirred faintly, waiting, though it knew not for what, clinging to the hope that someday, somehow, the rune he had wrought might be undone. Thus were the blades of black fate born, forged in despair, bound by sorrow, and destined to leave scars upon the world that would not heal until the very ending of days. Thus the 9, now fully revealed as the ring-wreaths, the Nazgûl of dread, passed out from the dark halls of Barad-dûr, each bearing in his gloved hand one of the blades of black fate, their forms wreathed in cloaks that fluttered though no breeze stirred the stagnant air of Mordor. Mounted upon black steeds bred for terror, they rode forth beneath a sky heavy with ash and smoke, a grim procession that struck fear into the hearts of all who beheld them. No heralds announced their passing, no banners marked their allegiance, but the land itself seemed to shrink from their coming, and the creatures of Mordor slunk aside, whimpering in their shadow. The Dark Lord watched them go from the heights of his iron tower, his gaze piercing through leagues of stone and air, and his spirit exulted in the completion of his design. For long had he desired instruments to carry his will into the farthest corners of the world, agents that no mortal blade could harm, no mortal courage withstand. Now they were made, and with them he would bring ruin to the proud cities of men, harrow the hidden realms of the elves, and rend the kingdoms of dwarves until all the lands of Middle-earth bowed beneath his yoke, or were cast down into dust and forgotten darkness. Yet deep within the blades of black fate, unseen and unknown even to the Dark Lord, the seed of rebellion had been sown, a slender hope, as frail and stubborn as the first green shoot that breaks the stones of a long-dead road. Brek's hidden runes, woven into the final blade with all the craft and desperation of his dying spirit, whispered still, though faint and far off, calling out across the void for one who might understand their meaning, one who might one day wield that forgotten knowledge against the evil that had shaped it. But in those days no such champion arose, and the Nazgûl, drunk with their newfound power, set about the dark work for which they had been wrought. They rode into the lands of men first, for the race of men, ever more pliable to the whisper of fear and the lure of dominion, was ripe for conquest. In the forgotten corners of the east and the south they appeared as wraith kings, clad in black and crowned with terror, and many fell before them, their spirits broken by the mere sight of those dreadful weapons, whose touch left wounds that festered not in flesh alone, but in heart and mind. Wherever the Nazgûl passed, ruin followed. Cities once bright with trade and song fell silent, their streets choked with ash and shadow. Fortresses that had withstood the siege of years crumbled within days when faced with the terror of the Nine. Forests withered, rivers turned sour, and the earth itself groaned beneath the weight of their malice. No wall was high enough, no gate strong enough, no valor steadfast enough to halt their advance, for the blades of black fate cut not only the body but the spirit, and those struck by them were left to wander as hollow shades, empty of memory or hope. In secret, the wise perceived the growing darkness and were troubled, though even they could not discern the true nature of the evil that had been loosed upon the world. In the hidden fastnesses of Lindon and Lothlorien, councils were held in hushed tones beneath the ancient trees, and the names of the Nine were spoken with dread. Wizards, newly arrived from the far west, walked the wild places and sought knowledge of these riders in black, but they found little save fear and ruin in their wake. In time, songs would be sung of the coming of the Nazgûl, songs of mourning and warning, though few would dare utter them openly. They spoke of black wings passing across the moon, of doors blown open by invisible winds, of voices calling from the shadows with promises sweet as honey and bitter as death. And always, always there was the memory of the blades, blacker than the void, sharper than sorrow, humming with a silent malice that no shield could turn. Yet amidst this mounting dread, a rumor, faint and fleeting as a breath upon the wind, began to stir among the wise and the hidden folk. It spoke of a flaw, a weakness buried within the dark enchantments that bound the Nine. A hidden hope, planted by a forgotten hand in the very moment of their making. None could say whence the rumor came, for no one living had witnessed the forging of the blades of black faith, and none among the free peoples had dared set foot within the dark halls where the rite had been wrought. Yet the rumor persisted, whispered among the hidden paths of the forest, and carried by secret messengers across the mountains. Some said that one of the 9 bore a weapon that could be turned against its master, that a rune had been graven deep within the black steel, unseen by mortal eyes, and that if the ancient words could be found and spoken, the blade might be awakened to its true purpose. Others scoffed at such tales, deeming them nothing more than the desperate hopes of a people besieged by a darkness beyond their power to resist. Still, the rumor grew, for hope, like the first trembling of spring after a bitter winter, cannot easily be stilled, even in the darkest of times. Thus it was that the legacy of Earthrack, the forsaken smith who had labored in the pits of despair, and whose soul had been bound to the 9, endured beyond the memory of his name. Though his body had perished and his works had been turned to evil, the small seed of defiance he had planted lived on, waiting for the hour when it might bear fruit, when one with the wisdom to perceive and the courage to act might arise to challenge the power of the 9, and through them the Dark Lord himself. But that hour was yet far off, and the world in those days bent ever more under the growing weight of shadow, and the black blades sang their silent, deathly song across the wide fields and broken towers of Middle-earth. The blades of black fate were borne across Middle-earth by the 9, and the terror of their coming passed like a plague among the free peoples, for no boundary of mountain or river could stay them, and no citadel, however high or hidden, could wholly escape the touch of their shadow. In the vast plains of Rune and the darkened coasts of Umbar, they gathered to themselves dark hearts and willing servants, kings and chieftains who, lured by promises of dominion or broken by fear, bent the knee to the will of Sauron and became thralls of the shadow. Even among the wise there was much debate and fear, for none understood fully the nature of the weapons the 9 now bore, nor could they fathom the means by which the very strength and hope of men was so swiftly undone. Some among the lore masters of the elves spoke of ancient forges lost to time, of arts forbidden and forgotten, wrought in the earliest days when Morgoth, the Black Enemy, still walked the world. Others whispered of darker things still, of the mingling of spirit and iron, of crafts that bent not merely the body but the soul itself to the purposes of evil. Yet none among them guessed at the full horror of Orthroc's fate, nor at the secret hope he had hidden within the forging. In the courts of Elrond and Rivendell, and in the golden woods of Lothlorien, beneath Galadriel's gaze, councils were held in secret, and grim messengers came and went in haste across the wild lands, bearing tidings of the growing strength of the Nazgûl. Fear grew among the free peoples, for it was seen that the blades carried by the 9 did more than slay. They left wounds that could not be healed, wounds that festered in the soul and brought the brave to madness and despair, even when the flesh endured. And yet, amidst the growing darkness, there were those who would not yield. In the northern wilds, where the remnants of the Dunedain held their lonely watch against the servants of the enemy, word began to spread of the rumored flaw within the blades, and of the faint hope that it might one day be turned to the undoing of the 9. Among them were those whose blood ran pure from the kings of old, men who remembered still the great wars against Morgoth, and who bore within them a stubborn flame that neither fear nor sorrow could quench. It was in those days that a chieftain of the Dunedain, Halvarion, son of Halbarad, rose to prominence among his scattered people. Wise beyond his years and valiant beyond measure, Halvarion was a man both of action and of thought, and he listened closely to the whispers that spoke of the hidden runes and the forgotten smith whose spirit might yet linger within the cursed blades. Long he pondered upon these things, and though the road seemed fraught with peril and shrouded in mist, he resolved to seek out the truth of the matter, even though it should cost him dearly. Thus Halvarion gathered a small company of the bravest among his kin, rangers hardened by long years of secret war against the creeping power of the enemy, and set forth on a quest unlike any that had been undertaken since the elder days. Their purpose was perilous indeed: to find one of the nine, to confront him if they could, and to discern whether there was any truth in the ancient rumor, whether the hidden runes still endured and could be awakened. They traveled in secret, moving by night and by ways forgotten by most, crossing through the empty lands where once proud kingdoms had stood, now reduced to fields of ruin and silent stone. The skies above were ever gray, veiled by smoke and sorcery, and the very beasts of the earth seemed to flee from their path. Yet they pressed on, for the hearts of the Dúnedain were steadfast, and their resolve was born not of hope for themselves, but of duty to those who would come after, that the shadow might not wholly devour the world without a final stand. In the wastes of southern Eriador, beneath the broken towers of an ancient fortress where once the kings of men had held court, they came upon signs of the Nazgûl's passing. The grass was withered, the stones blackened as though by fire, and the air heavy with a despair so thick that it seemed to press upon the heart like a weight. Yet more terrible still were the marks they found upon the ground. Strange sigils burned into the earth itself, traces of the fell magic bound into the blades, which left scars upon the world wherever they were drawn. Halvaron knelt and studied the markings by the pale light of the moon, and though the knowledge of ancient tongues had grown dim among men, he perceived faint echoes of the runes of old, and his heart stirred with both dread and wonder. He saw that the marks were not wholly of evil-making, that amidst the curses and bindings there were other signs, subtler and more hidden, signs that spoke of sorrow and defiance, as of a voice crying out in a place where none might hear. Thus they knew that the rumor was no mere fancy of desperate hearts, but a thing of substance, and their quest gained new urgency. Yet even as they pondered their next steps, a sudden dread fell upon them, and the very air grew cold and still, and they knew that one of the nine was near. From the north he came, a shadow among shadows, mounted upon a black steed whose eyes burned with a red light, and in his hand he bore one of the blades of black fate, its edge gleaming with a malice that seemed to drink the starlight itself. The company of Halvarion scattered among the ruins, for none among the living could stand openly before the Nazgûl and hope to endure. Yet Halvarion, drawing his blade, steeled himself and prepared to face the wraith, for he knew that the knowledge they sought could not be won save by great peril and greater sacrifice. Thus, beneath the broken towers of forgotten kings, the Dúnedain and the Nazgûl came face to face, and the fate of many things hung trembling in the balance, though few in that dark hour knew it. The Black Rider came on, swift and silent, his dread steed bearing him over the broken earth as though the ruins of ancient kings were no more than mist before the storm. His presence alone seemed to darken the very stars above, and the few pale beams of moonlight that pierced the clouded sky fled from his path. In his hand, the blade of black fate shimmered with a foul light, its edge yearning for the blood and spirit of the living, and a fear such as few mortals could endure fell upon the company of the Dunedain. Yet Hilverion, though his heart quailed within him and his limbs grew heavy as lead, did not flee. Calling upon the memory of his fathers and the ancient oaths that bound his house to the service of the free peoples, he raised his voice in a cry of challenge, a clear and ringing sound that echoed among the shattered stones. His sword, wrought in a bygone age by smiths who had learned their craft beneath the tutelage of the Eldar, caught what little light remained and flashed as he drew it forth. The Nazgûl did not speak, for the mouths of the nine were long bereft of mortal voice. Instead, he turned his steed toward Hilverion and came upon him with a swiftness that was terrible to behold. The blade he bore seemed to sing not with music, but with a soundless wail that pierced the mind and filled it with visions of despair. Hilverion braced himself and met the charge with a courage that few in that age could match. Their blades clashed with a sound like the breaking of ice upon a winter sea, and the shock of the blow drove Hilverion to his knees. Yet even as he struggled against the crushing weight of the wraith's malice, his keen eyes caught a glimpse of strange markings upon the dark blade that pressed against his own. Faint they were, and wrought in a manner unfamiliar to him, but something within his blood stirred at their sight, and a fragment of forgotten lore sprang to his mind, taught in secret by the wise, to those few who might one day stand against the darkness. With a great cry he flung himself aside, narrowly escaping a blow that would have ended both body and soul, and scrambled to his feet among the fallen stones. His companions, seeing their captain thus embattled, rallied to his side, loosing arrows from hidden places and striving to draw the Nazgûl's attention. Yet their weapons, though bravely wielded, could not pierce the shroud of sorcery that cloaked the wraith, and their shafts fell harmlessly to the ground. Knowing that flight alone could save them, Hilverion called out, and the rangers scattered, melting into the night like smoke before the wind. He himself lingered but a moment longer, long enough to commit to memory the strange runes he had seen, then fled, swift and silent, through the broken courts of the ancient fortress. The wraith followed for a time, but the ruins were many, and the paths hidden, and though his dread voice rose in a cry that froze the blood in the veins, he could not find his quarry in the tangled ways. Thus, by craft and courage, did Hilverion escape that night, though the mark of the Nazgûl's terror lay heavy upon him, and the memory of the blade's malice would haunt his dreams for many nights thereafter. By secret paths he and his company made their way northward, fleeing the tainted lands where the wraiths roamed, and at last they came to the hidden valley of Rivendell, where Elrond half-elven yet held counsel and refuge against the shadow. There, beneath the vaulted halls, and amid the murmur of ancient waters, Hilverion laid before the wise all that he had seen, recounting the runes graven upon the blade of black fate and the dread power it had wielded. Long the wise debated, for the markings were strange even to them, and their meaning lay veiled in mystery. Yet among them was one, a lore master of great renown, who, searching the deepest vaults of memory and forgotten song, found at last a glimmer of understanding. He spoke of a smith of the elder days, of one Urthrak the bright-handed, who had vanished into darkness and whose fate had long been a matter of sorrowful legend. He told of a craft so ancient and perilous that none among the free peoples now practiced it, a craft that could bind spirit to steel, and he declared that the markings described by Hilverion bore the unmistakable hand of that lost master, though twisted and burdened by the curse of Hope stirred then among the council, faint and perilous though it was. For if indeed earth-racked spirit lingered within the blades, and if the runes were crafted with a hidden purpose, then there might yet be a means to awaken that purpose and turn the weapons against the masters who bore them. But the way would be hard and the cost bitter, for to confront one of the nine, to wrest from his hand the blade of black fate, and to speak the hidden words of awakening, would demand courage and sacrifice of a measure seldom seen in the fading days of Middle-earth. Thus was a great purpose set before Halvarion and his company, one that would lead them into perils beyond reckoning and into the very heart of the shadow. Yet they did not shrink from the path, for they were of the Dunedain, the last scions of a noble line, and their hearts were steadfast in the service of the light, though the darkness gathered thick about them. In that hour, as the stars wheeled in their ancient courses above Rivendell and the waters sang of days long past, a slender thread of hope was spun, a hope born from the forgotten labor of a broken smith, now placed into the hands of those who might yet redeem it. Thus Halvarion and his company abode for a time in Rivendell, gathering strength and counsel beneath the watchful gaze of Elrond and the wise, for they knew well that the road before them would be perilous beyond any they had yet trod. Many were the counsels given, and many the songs sung in secret chambers of old deeds and darker days, when the Valar themselves had gone forth against the shadow, and when mortal hands had taken up burdens that shaped the fate of all the world. Yet for all the lore that was summoned and all the wisdom that was spoken, none could tell for certain where the blade Halvarion had glimpsed might be found again, nor how they might wrest it from the hand of its dread bearer. For the Nazgûl moved swiftly and secretly across the face of Middle-earth, obeying the will of their master and weaving his darkness into the hearts of men, and none could predict their coming or their going. Only this was known, that the wraith Halvarion had encountered was lesser among the nine, a servant rather than a captain, and that he lingered often in the lands east of the Misty Mountains, where the shadows lengthened and the hearts of men grew weak. Therefore it was resolved that Halvarion and a few of his most trusted companions should pass eastward into those lands, seeking to lay hands upon the blade or perish in the attempt. For in their hearts they knew that if the nine were left unchecked, no stronghold of the free peoples would long endure. Thus they made ready, and when the time came, they departed quietly from Rivendell, passing out under the stars without trumpets or heralds, for the task laid upon them was one of secrecy and stealth, and the power of the enemy waxed daily. They crossed the Brunnen at a ford known to few, and journeyed southward along the hidden ways of Eriador, avoiding the open road where spies and worse things might lurk. Gray were the days, and darker yet the nights, for the clouds of Mordor spread far and wide, even so many leagues west of the Mountain of Fire, and the light of the sun grew dim and uncertain. Long they traveled thus, through wild lands and forgotten ruins, past hills crowned with ancient cairns and forests where no bird sang and no beast stirred, until at last they came to the feet of the Misty Mountains, those great barriers of stone that had stood since the shaping of the world. There they turned eastward, seeking passage through the lesser-known passes, for the high roads were watched, and tales spoke of dark things stirring in the deeps of stone, creatures of the elder darkness that had awakened in the secret places of the earth. Their path led them into dim valleys where the mists clung like cobwebs and the waters of the streams ran cold and bitter, and often they heard the cry of fell beasts upon the wind. though they glimpsed them not with mortal eye. At times they came upon the traces of ancient roads, paved with worn stones and marked with the symbols of kings long fallen into dust. And in those hours their hearts were lifted somewhat, for it seemed to them that the memory of old valor lingered still, faint but unbroken. Thus they passed over the mountains and came at last into the wild lands east of the Anduin, where the hills rose in long, tumbled ranges and the forests were deep and tangled. Few dwelt in those regions, save for wandering bands of men whose allegiance was uncertain, and darker things that crept forth by night to feast upon the unwary. It was a country of half-forgotten evil, and the shadow of Mordor lay heavy upon it, though the Dark Lord's hand was yet unseen. Here Halvarian and his companions moved with great care, setting watch at every camp and speaking little even among themselves, for they knew that the Nazgûl could sense the presence of the living from afar, and that the blades of black faith hungered ever for blood and fear. They sought tidings among the scattered folk of the land, offering aid where they could and learning what little was whispered in fearful voices. Tales of a black rider seen upon the old eastward roads, of wells fouled and cattle slain, of dreams haunted by the spectre of a king whose face was veiled in night. In time, they came upon a village, little more than a cluster of hovels cowering beneath the eaves of a dark wood. There they found signs of recent terror, doors broken asunder, fields laid waste, and a heavy silence that no living thing dared break. Questioning the few survivors who yet remained, Halvarian learned that a rider in black had passed that way not 3 nights before, and that he bore a sword unlike any seen by mortal eyes, a blade that seemed to drink the very light from the air. Following the trail, faint though it was, they pressed onward, deeper into the wood where the trees grew twisted and the light was dim even at midday. The ground beneath their feet was soft and treacherous, and the air was thick with the scent of rot and decay. Often they heard whispering voices that seemed to rise from the very earth, though no speaker could be seen, and once they glimpsed a figure, tall and black-cloaked, moving among the trees at a distance. Yet when they hastened toward it, they found nothing but shadow and mist. At last, upon a narrow path hemmed in by brambles and ancient yew trees, they came face to face with their quarry. The Nazgûl stood in their path, motionless as a statue of darkest stone, his dread steed pawing the earth and his black blade gleaming with a lightless fire. No words were spoken, for the wraiths of Sauron have no need of speech. Their will is a force that presses upon the mind like a storm upon a lonely tower. Halvarian stepped forward, his sword drawn and his shield raised, and behind him his companions formed a tight ring, their faces set with grim resolve. The air grew chill, and the wind died utterly, and it seemed that time itself held its breath, as living and unliving prepared to clash. Thus, in the heart of the dark wood, the company of the Dunedain stood alone against one of the 9, and the fate of Earthrock's hidden hope hung trembling between shadow and light. The wraith moved with a dreadful certainty, as though borne by the will of some dark and inexorable power, and in his gloved hand the blade of black fate stirred, whispering through the chill air with a sound like the sighing of lost souls. No mortal eye could discern the face beneath the heavy cowl, but the weight of his gaze, unseen yet keenly felt, fell upon Halvarian and his companions, and it was as though the icy touch of death itself brushed their hearts. Fear rose up like a black tide, seeking to drown their courage and scatter their purpose. But the Dunedain, steadfast and grim, stood their ground, calling upon the strength of their ancient blood and the hidden hope that had carried them thus far into shadow. Halvarion tightened his grip upon his sword, the hilt warm beneath his fingers, and he spoke aloud in the tongue of old Numenor, words of defiance and remembrance, for he knew that against such a foe only valor and faith could avail. His voice rang clear and true, cutting through the oppressive silence, and for a moment a flicker of hesitation seemed to pass through the wraith, like a ripple across a stagnant pool. Yet the Nazgûl advanced, lifting his black blade in a slow, deliberate arc, and the darkness deepened about him until it seemed that no light remained in all the world. With a great cry, Halvarion leapt forward, meeting the wraith's blow with a clash that rang among the twisted trees like the tolling of some dread bell. His companions, shouting the ancient battle cries of their fathers, sprang to his aid, their swords flashing in the dimness, and for a time the wood echoed with the sounds of fierce struggle. Yet it was as fighting against the deep night itself, for the wraith's strength was tireless, and no mortal blade could truly wound him. Only the force of their will, their unity, and the hidden power of the secret runes could give them any hope of victory. Blow after blow fell upon Halvarion's shield, each stroke more terrible than the last, and though his arms grew weary and his breath came in ragged gasps, he did not yield. He sought the runes he had glimpsed before, striving to see them amid the swirling gloom, but the black blade moved with a speed and malice that made such hope seem vain. Again and again their blades met, and each time Halvarion felt a part of his strength torn away, as if the very act of resisting the Nazgûl's will was a battle waged within his soul. Yet he remembered the teachings of the wise, the whispered lore of Rivendell, and the songs of his people sung in secret glades when all else seemed lost. Summoning his last reserves of strength, he feigned a faltering step, drawing the wraith forward, and with a sudden, desperate stroke, he cast aside his shield and seized the black blade itself, grasping it with his bare hand despite the searing pain that coursed through his flesh. The blade burned with a cold fire, and the runes flared briefly to life, their hidden script revealed in a light unseen by mortal eyes, but known to the spirit. In that moment, Halvarion saw the truth, the secret wrought by Earthrack, the defiant hope buried within the darkness, the ancient words that could awaken the blade's hidden doom. Though the pain was great and his strength all but spent, he spoke the words, not in the common tongue of men, but in the high speech of the Eldar, words of unmaking and release, taught by the wise in days when the world was still young. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The wraith recoiled, his black cloak swirling as if caught by an unseen wind, and a soundless cry of fury burst forth from the emptiness where once a mortal voice had dwelt. The blade shuddered in Halvarion's grasp, struggling against the ancient command, but he held firm, repeating the words with greater force, pouring into them all the strength of his spirit, all the hopes of his people, all the memories of light and life that still lingered in his heart. Slowly, terribly, the dark blade began to crack, thin lines of silver fire running along its length, and the wraith staggered, his form wavering and shrinking, as if the very foundations of his being were undone. The black horse reared and fled into the night, and the Nazgûl, bereft of his steed and weapon, fell to his knees upon the barren ground, a shadow unraveling before the coming of a new dawn. Halvarin, gasping and bleeding from many wounds, cast the sundered blade aside, and it fell to the earth with a final shivering note like the breaking of a chain that had bound the soul for uncounted years. His companions gathered about him, their faces grim and awestruck, for they knew that they had witnessed a deed rare and perilous, one that would be sung of in the hidden halls of the Dunedain for generations to come. But the wraith was not wholly destroyed, for the rings of power bound the nine too tightly for any single blow to undo their doom. Yet he was broken and cast down, and his power waned, and he fled, a shadow among shadows, back toward Mordor, bearing with him the bitter knowledge that his blade, one of the blades of black fate, had been turned against him. Thus, in the heart of the dark wood, was the secret of Urthrak's labor tested and proven true, and the slender thread of hope, spun so long ago in the depths of despair, was strengthened and brightened, though many trials yet lay ahead. For the nine were mighty, and the Dark Lord's hand was long, and the path of the Dunedain would lead through sorrow and loss ere the final reckoning. Yet for a little while the darkness was driven back, and the memory of that victory would endure, a beacon for those who would come after, who would stand against the shadow, even when all hope seemed vain. The woods stood silent in the wake of the battle, its twisted boughs creaking faintly as if whispering among themselves of the mighty deed that had there been wrought, and the stars, veiled though they were by the creeping mists of Mordor, seemed for a time to shine with a clearer, sterner light, as though the heavens themselves had taken heed of what had passed. Halvarion, though sore wounded and near to the limits of mortal endurance, stood upright among his companions, and his gaze was steadfast as he surveyed the broken remnant of the blade of black fate, which now lay scattered in fragments of black and silver upon the dark earth. No word was spoken for a time, for the hearts of the Dunedain were full of wonder and dread, and each man knew that they had touched a thing greater than themselves, a mystery woven into the deep fabric of the world, older than memory and wrought with sorrow and hope mingled together. At last it was Halvarion who broke the stillness, his voice low but clear, carrying in it the weariness of battle and the iron resolve of one who has glimpsed a path through the darkness. "It is true," he said, "true beyond all doubting. The smith's craft endures, though he be long lost to us. Urthrak's spirit, bound and burdened, has not wholly yielded to the shadow. In the forging of these blades he set a seed of defiance, and by that seed may the doom of the nine yet be wrought." His companions murmured assent, and some wept openly, for they had seen with their own eyes the breaking of a terror that had seemed invincible, and in that breaking they found a hope that had long been denied them. Yet they also knew, as all wise hearts must, that this small victory was but the beginning of a longer, harder road, and that the enemy, though wounded, would not suffer this blow without swift and terrible answer. This would not descend to the Sabbath board without swift and terrible answer. And Halvarion knelt by the shards of the black blade and gathered them with care, wrapping them in cloths steeped in the blessings of Rivendell, for he deemed them still dangerous, though broken, and laden with the malice of their forging. He knew that much might yet be learned from these remnants, and that the wise would wish to study them, seeking to understand more fully the arts by which the Nazgûl were bound and sustained. With their grim trophy secured, the company turned westward once more, seeking to retrace their steps through the dark and perilous woods. Yet the way was harder now, for the wrath of the enemy had been stirred, and the very earth seemed to conspire against them. Storms rose suddenly, lashing the trees with black rain and bending the great boughs until they groaned and split. Strange voices whispered from the thickets, and lights pale and cold flitted among the shadows, luring the unwary toward unseen perils. Often they were forced to turn aside from their path, seeking safer ground among rocky hills or deep valleys where the trees grew less thickly, and always they moved with caution, setting a watch by night and keeping silence during the hours of darkness. For they knew that though one of the 9 had been cast down, the others remained, and that even now the servants of Mordor might be seeking them, drawn by the memory of the broken blade and the scent of mortal hope. Days passed thus, hard and full of toil, and the hearts of the company grew heavy with weariness and dread. Yet Halvarion did not falter, nor did he suffer despair to master him, for he carried within him the memory of that moment when the runes of Earthrack had flared to life and the dark blade had cracked and failed before the ancient words of power. It was a light in the darkness, a steadfast star that guided his steps when all else seemed lost. At last, after many perils and long wanderings, they came again to the western feet of the misty mountains and found a hidden pass known to few, by which they crossed into the lands of Eriador. There the air was clearer, and the skies, though still veiled with cloud, seemed less burdened with the oppression of the east. They made their way northward swiftly, avoiding the roads where the spies of the enemy might lurk, and after many days' journey they came once more to Rivendell. Great was the wonder and the joy of the wise when Halvarion laid before them the shards of the dark blade and recounted all that had passed. Long they studied the fragments, and the lore masters of Elrond delved deep into ancient knowledge, seeking to understand more fully the nature of the runes and the spirit that lingered within them. And it was revealed to them that indeed Earthrack's hand had wrought a secret flaw into each of the blades of black fate, hidden so deeply that only the speaking of ancient words in the high speech of the elves, by one of pure heart and steadfast will, could awaken it. Thus the wise knew that the Nazgûl were not invincible, though their power was great and their bonds strong. They knew also that the path of victory would be hard, for to confront each of the 9, to wrest the blade from his grasp, and to speak the words of unmaking, would require deeds of valor and sacrifice beyond any yet seen in that age. Still, hope had been kindled anew, and secret councils were held in Rivendell, where Elrond and the other lords of the West laid plans for the long struggle that lay ahead. Messengers were sent forth, swift and silent, bearing tidings to the hidden strongholds of the free peoples, calling upon the faithful to prepare for the coming war. For they knew that the time of open conflict was drawing near, and that the enemy, though patient, would not delay his designs much longer. As for Halvarion and his company, they were given a place of honor among the Dunedain and among all those who loved freedom and light. Songs were sung of their deeds, songs that spoke of courage in the face of despair and of a hope born from sorrow. Songs that would be remembered in the long years to come, even unto the ending of days. Yet Halvarion's heart was not at ease, for he knew that his task was not yet ended, and that many labors lay before him. He had seen the face of the shadow, and he knew that it would not be easily defeated. The victory they had won was but a beginning, a single step upon a road that led through darkness and into peril beyond any they had yet faced. But he also knew, as he stood beneath the stars in the gardens of Rivendell, that they were not alone. The memory of Earthrock's sacrifice, the secret defiance woven into the blades of black fate, and the courage of those who yet resisted the darkness, these would be their strength in the days to come, a light that no shadow could wholly extinguish. Thus the days passed in Rivendell, a place of refuge and memory, where the light of the ancient world yet lingered, though the shadows beyond grew longer and more perilous with each passing season. In the halls of Elrond, wise councils were held, and emissaries came and went in secret, bearing tidings to the hidden realms of the West. For it was known among the wise that the hour of open war approached, and that neither strength nor subtlety alone would suffice to withstand the fury of the enemy once he should move in earnest. Yet, in those hidden gardens where the waters of the Bruennin murmured their ceaseless songs and the stars shone undiminished, Halvarion found a brief peace, a respite from the long burden of fear and toil, and he pondered often the broken blade and the ancient runes that had so nearly cost him his life. He knew well that his part in the great design was not yet fulfilled, for the 9 remained, terrible and undiminished save one, and their master's wrath would surely be swift and fell. The knowledge of Earthrock's hidden craft, though it brought hope, was a danger also, for if the enemy learned that his weapons were flawed, he would seek to conceal or strengthen them, and the slender thread of defiance might be severed ere it could be fully grasped. Therefore it was resolved among the wise that the secret must be kept, revealed only to those whose hearts were proven and whose strength was sufficient for the burden. Few were thus chosen, and they were sent forth in 1s and 2s, journeying into the wide lands of Middle-earth, where the Nazgûl rode and the black blades wrought sorrow and ruin. Their task was to gather knowledge, to watch and to wait, and when the time was ripe, to act, each in his place according to the ancient plan. Halvarion himself, though sore wounded in body and spirit, took up this charge without hesitation. For though he longed for the peace of Rivendell and the sweet forgetfulness of the green valleys, he knew that his destiny lay upon a darker road, one that must be walked in secrecy and shadow, where few would tread and fewer still would return. In secret he took leave of Elrond and the wise, and gathering a small band of trusted companions, he passed out once more into the wild, bearing with him the knowledge of the broken blade and the hope that yet endured. Southward they journeyed first, passing through lands where once proud kingdoms had stood, now little more than scattered stones and broken halls haunted by the restless dead. In the empty fields of Cardolan and the shadowed woods of Minhirioth they moved swiftly and in silence, for the lands were watched by the spies of the enemy, and strange shapes flitted among the ruins by night. Often they heard the cries of beasts unnatural, and the wailing of spirits that had long since lost all memory of light, and often, too, they found signs of the passage of the 9, scorched earth, withered trees, and the stench of despair that lingered where the wraiths had passed. Yet for all their wariness, the enemy grew stronger with each passing day. In the east, the fires of Mordor burned anew, and the smoke of the mountain of fire spread across the heavens like a second darkness, dimming the sun and cloaking the stars. In the south, the black ships of Umbar stirred in their hidden harbors, and in the north, the goblins of the misty mountains poured forth from their dark holds, emboldened by the rising of their ancient master. Halvarion and his company knew that they could not confront such power openly, nor was it their purpose. Rather, they sought to find the 9 where they wandered apart from one another, to wrest their blades by guile or stealth, and to awaken the secret defiance that might yet undo them. It was a task grim beyond telling, for the Nazgûl were tireless and keen of sense, and their dread steeds could outstrip the fleetest mount of the free peoples. Yet the Dunedain were cunning, and their lore was deep, and they knew the hidden ways of the world where others saw only ruin and despair. In the dark woodlands of southern Eriador, they came upon a village that had been struck down but days before, The fields were trampled and the wells fouled, and the few survivors spoke of a rider in black whose blade burned with a fire that froze rather than seared. From them Halverion learned that the wraith had passed eastward toward the broken lands that lay between the rivers, and thither they turned their course, following the faint traces of his passage. Long they journeyed thus, often in silence, for the hearts of the company grew heavy with the burden of their quest, and each man knew that the fate of many things now rested upon the frail hope they bore. Yet they did not falter, for the blood of Númenor ran strong in their veins, and they remembered the ancient oaths sworn by their fathers in the days of the great wars, when the world was younger and the stars shone brighter. At last, beneath a sky veiled in storm and a moon pale as bone, they came upon the wraith, riding alone upon a ridge of broken stone. He bore himself with the pride of one who knows no fear, and in his hand he held aloft a blade whose edge gleamed darkly even in the failing light. Halverion knew at once that it was another of the blades of black fate, and his heart stirred with a grim resolve. Yet they dared not rush upon him openly, for the wraith's senses were keen, and his strength in open battle was beyond their measure. Therefore they watched and waited, following him from afar as he made his slow, relentless way across the desolate land, seeking a moment when he might be caught alone and unguarded, when the hidden runes might be spoken and the secret hope awakened once more. Thus began a long and perilous hunt, a game of shadow and silence, where the stakes were no less than the fate of Middle-earth itself. The Dunedain moved like wraiths of their own, unseen and unheard, slipping among the rocks and ruins, their eyes ever fixed upon the dark rider, whose fall might herald the weakening of the Nine, and the beginning of the end for the shadow that lay upon the world. And all the while, the broken fragments of the first blade, borne carefully by Halverion, whispered faintly in the darkness, as if urging them onward, bearing with them the memory of Earthrack's sacrifice and the slender thread of hope that yet endured amid the gathering storm. Thus the hunt wore on, day giving way to night and night to day, though little light or rest was found beneath the brooding skies that stretched unbroken above the waste. Halverion and his company followed the wraith with tireless resolve, tracking him through desolate hills and stony vales, through thickets of thorn and across barren streams whose waters whispered only of sorrow. Their strength waned and their hopes were sorely tested, yet still they pressed onward, driven by the knowledge that in this single contest so much of what they loved and guarded might be preserved or lost forever. At last the wraith came to a place of ancient ruin, a fortress of the elder days, now little more than broken walls and towers that leaned drunkenly against the stormy sky. Here he made his camp, if such it could be called, for the Nazgûl had no need of shelter or fire. Rather he stood alone amid the fallen stones, as though drawing dark strength from the memory of ages long past, and the blade he bore seemed to pulse with a slow, malevolent light, as if feeding upon the lingering despair of the place. Halverion and his men crept close under cover of the broken walls, their hearts beating as one with the drum of distant thunder. They knew that they must act swiftly and with cunning, for if the wraith sensed their presence, the battle would be grim indeed, and the chance of victory slim. Therefore they devised a plan, bold and perilous, while the others created a diversion, drawing the wraith's attention and perhaps luring him from the blade he bore. Halverion would approach unseen, and, if fortune favored him, seize the weapon, long enough to speak the ancient words of unmaking. Thus they set their plan in motion. 3 of the company, cloaked in shadow, moved silently to the far side of the ruins, where they loosed arrows at the stones, causing them to clatter and fall, raising a noise as of a force approaching. The wraith turned at once, his black hooded head swiveling toward the sound, and he moved forward with a dreadful grace, his blade raised high. Seizing the moment, Halvarion sprang from his hiding place and rushed toward the blade where it lay upon a fragment of fallen masonry. His hand closed upon the hilt, and a searing cold shot through his arm, as if the very fires of the void had been poured into his veins. Darkness rose before his eyes, and the whispers of forgotten terrors clawed at his mind, but he clenched his teeth, and drawing upon the full measure of his will, he spoke the words he had learned, the ancient phrases wrought in the tongue of the Eldar before the fading of the first stars. At first there was only silence, and Halvarion feared that he had failed, but then the blade began to tremble in his grasp, and the runes hidden deep within its blackened steel flared with a silver light, faint yet pure, as though some imprisoned spirit were stirring to life within the iron prison. The wraith, sensing the peril, let out a cry so terrible that the very stones of the runes seemed to shudder and crack, and he turned back with a speed born of terror. He was too late. With a great cry, Halvarion completed the ancient invocation, and the blade shattered in his hand, bursting apart in a spray of light and shadow that drove back the wraith as a gust of purest wind might scatter the foul vapors of the tomb. The Nazgûl reeled, his form flickering and dimming, and for a moment it seemed as though he might be utterly undone. Yet the power that bound the 9 was deep and strong, and though broken and weakened, the wraith did not perish. Instead, he fled, howling into the night, his strength sorely diminished, leaving behind the fragments of his sundered blade and a lingering dread that would not soon be lifted. Halvarion fell to his knees, the strength draining from him like water from a shattered vessel. His companions rushed to his side, bearing him up with words of praise and sorrow. For though they had struck a mighty blow against the servants of the enemy, they saw that their captain's wounds were deep, and the shadow of the blade's malice lingered in his flesh and spirit. Long they tended him in that desolate place, and at length, by their care and by the healing arts of Rivendell, which they had learned in part, he was brought back from the brink of death, though he would bear the marks of that battle all his days. Together they gathered the remnants of the broken blade, wrapping them with care and reverence, for they knew that each fragment held a memory of their hard-won victory and a warning of the peril that still lay ahead. Thus they returned at last to Rivendell, weary but unbowed, bearing tidings of hope amidst the gathering gloom. Great was the wonder of Elrond and the wise when they beheld the broken blade and heard the tale of its unmaking, and they rejoiced that the secret hope sown by Earthrock in the darkness of Barad-dûr had borne fruit, though at great cost. In secret councils they spoke of what must yet be done, for though 2 of the 9 had been broken and their strength diminished, 7 still rode abroad, bearing weapons of despair and death. It was clear that the road would be long and perilous, and that many more sacrifices would be demanded before the final victory could be won. Yet it was also clear that the enemy's power was not beyond all hope of challenge, that even the darkest sorceries could be undone by courage, wisdom, and the steadfast light of defiance. As for Halvarion, he was honored among his people and named Elf Friend by Elrond, a title granted only to those few who had earned the trust and love of the Eldar. Songs were made of his deeds, and his name became a watchword among the Dunedain, a symbol of the endurance and resilience of the free peoples against the shadow that sought to consume the world. But he himself remained humble, knowing that the victory was not his alone, but born of the sacrifice of Urtrak the Forsaken, who had labored in darkness and despair to plant a seed of hope that others might one day find. Often he would walk alone beneath the stars, gazing into the west where the undying lands lay beyond mortal sight. And he would sing softly in the old tongue songs of sorrow and remembrance, songs for the smith who had given all, and whose name would be written not in glory, but in the quiet hearts of those who still remembered. Thus ended the tale of the Blades of Black Fate, though the struggle against the shadow would endure for many years yet. And though darkness would rise and fall many times before the end, and many heroes would come and pass from the circles of the world, the memory of Urthrak's hidden defiance and Halvarian's steadfast courage would remain a light in the darkness until the final breaking of the world and the remaking of all things.